on a cold, rainy night in the mountains of Colorado. While the entire town slept beneath the sound of thunder and distant wind, Elias Carter sat alone inside his small radio repair shop, surrounded by old wires, flickering lamps, and the quiet hum of forgotten machines. He had spent years fixing broken radios that nobody else cared about anymore, living a simple life with his young daughter after losing almost everything that once mattered to him. But that night, something unusual happened. As Elias adjusted the frequency on an old military radio covered in dust, a sudden burst of static filled the room before a weak, trembling voice broke through the noise. "Mayday! If anyone can hear this." Elias froze instantly. The voice sounded old, distorted, almost impossible yet painfully real. Then came the words that made his blood run cold. Captain Samuel Reed. The same Samuel Reed who had disappeared without a trace more than 20 years ago during a mysterious flight over the Colorado mountains. The same man the world believed was long dead. And in that exact moment, Elias realized the signal coming through his radio was never supposed to exist. The rain had been falling over Blackwood Creek since late afternoon, turning the narrow mountain roads into rivers of mud and fog. Most of the town had already gone dark for the night, but a faint golden light still glowed from the small radio repair shop sitting quietly at the end of Maple Street. Inside the cramped little building, shelves filled with old receivers, dusty military radios, and broken cassette players lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The air smelled faintly of warm metal, engine oil, and coffee that had long gone cold. Elias Carter sat alone at his workbench beneath a flickering lamp, carefully adjusting the wiring inside an old military transmitter that looked older than he was. His rough hands moved slowly, with the kind of patience only years of loneliness could teach. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, rattling the shop windows softly. For most people in Blackwood Creek, Elias was simply the quiet, widowed man who fixed things nobody else wanted anymore. Few people knew that before opening this tiny repair shop, he had once worked as a signal engineer for military aviation systems many years ago. Fewer still knew why he left that life behind. A staircase creaked softly from upstairs. "Dad, are you still working?" a sleepy voice called out. Elias looked up and smiled faintly as his daughter Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in an oversized cream-colored sweater, rubbing her tired eyes. "You should be asleep," Elias said gently. "I tried," Lily replied, walking downstairs while holding her small notebook against her chest. "The thunder's too loud." Elias pulled an old wooden stool beside him. "Come here." Lily climbed onto the stool and rested her head against his shoulder while he continued working on the radio. The room fell quiet, except for the soft clicking of tools and the constant static whispering from the machine on the desk. "Who used to own this one?" Lily asked quietly. Elias glanced at the faded military markings on the radio's metal casing. "Air Force, probably," he answered. "Long time ago." Lily stared at the blinking frequency dial with sleepy curiosity. "Do you think old radios remember things?" Elias chuckled softly. "Sometimes I think they remember more than people do." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm outside only grew heavier. Then suddenly, the static changed. Elias immediately froze. The sound coming from the radio shifted from ordinary interference into a sharp, distorted pulse. His expression darkened instantly. Slowly, he reached for the tuning knob and adjusted the signal. The pulse came again. Then a voice, weak, broken, almost buried beneath layers of static. "Mayday, mayday." Lily lifted her head immediately. "Dad?" Elias held up one hand, signaling her to stay quiet. The voice crackled louder through the speaker. "If anyone can hear this." Elias's eyes narrowed. Every instinct in his body suddenly awakened. This wasn't random interference. It was a real transmission. The signal cut violently before returning again in short, fragmented bursts. Engine failure, losing altitude, static, exploded across the room. Then finally, Captain Samuel Reed. The name hit Elias like a physical blow. His hand slowly slipped away from the tuning dial. Lily looked up at him nervously. "What's wrong?" But Elias didn't answer, because Samuel Reed wasn't just any pilot. 23 years ago, Captain Samuel Reed vanished during a classified military flight over the Colorado mountains. No wreckage was ever found. No distress signal was ever recovered. After months of searching, the government officially declared him dead. And yet somehow, his voice had just come through Elias's radio. The shop suddenly felt colder than before. Outside, lightning flashed across the mountains, illuminating the rain-covered windows for a brief second. Then, the transmission returned, one final time. Weak, almost ghost-like. Don't let them find it. The signal died instantly. Silence filled the room. Lily stared at her father, frightened now. But Elias could only look at the old military radio sitting silently on the desk, because deep down, he already knew one terrifying thing. That transmission was never supposed to exist. Morning arrived slowly over Blackwood Creek, beneath thick grey clouds and cold mountain fog. The rain had finally stopped during the early hours before dawn, leaving the small town damp and unusually quiet. Water dripped steadily from rooftops, while the streets remained almost empty, except for a few old pickup trucks parked outside the diner across the road. Inside the radio repair shop, Elias Carter had not slept at all. The old military transmitter still sat on his workbench, exactly where he had left it. Wires spilled across the table beside scattered notebooks, filled with hastily written frequencies and signal patterns. An untouched cup of coffee had gone cold hours ago. Elias replayed the recording again. Static, crackling. Then the faint voice, "Mayday." He stopped the tape immediately. Something about the transmission disturbed him in a way he could not explain. Distress signals from old frequencies occasionally surfaced through atmospheric interference, but not like this. Not this clear, not this specific. And definitely not from Samuel Reed. Upstairs, soft footsteps crossed the wooden floor. A few seconds later, Lily came downstairs, carrying 2 pieces of toast on a plate. "You never went to bed, did you?" she asked quietly. Elias forced a small smile. "I lost track of time." "You always say that when something's bothering you." He looked at her for a moment before taking the plate from her hands. "You're getting too smart for me." Lily sat beside the radio and studied the blinking frequency numbers. "Are you scared?" The question caught him off guard. Elias hesitated, then finally nodded once. "A little." Lily looked back at the machine. Maybe the radio just wants somebody to listen. Before Elias could answer, the bell above the shop door suddenly rang. Both of them looked up. A woman stepped inside wearing a long black coat damp from melted snow and rain. She looked completely out of place in Blackwood Creek. Sharp posture, expensive leather boots, dark hair tied neatly behind her head. Everything about her carried the fast, cold energy of a city far away from this quiet mountain town. She removed her gloves slowly while scanning the shop. "You're Elias Carter?" Elias stood carefully. "Depends who's asking." The woman reached into her coat pocket and handed him a business card. Victoria Hale, Senior Investigative Reporter, New York Chronicle. Lily's eyes widened slightly. "A real reporter?" Victoria offered a polite smile before turning back toward Elias. "I drove 3 hours through a mountain storm because someone sent me an audio file last night." Elias's expression hardened instantly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Victoria studied him closely. "The email came from this shop." Elias said nothing. Victoria slowly placed her phone on the counter and pressed play. The distorted signal filled the room. Captain Samuel Reed. The shop suddenly fell silent, except for the static echoing softly through the speakers. Victoria lowered the volume. "That recording has already reached 3 military historians and a retired Air Force investigator," she said calmly. "All of them agree on one thing." Elias crossed his arms. "And what's that?" Victoria looked directly into his eyes. "The voice sounds authentic." Lily looked nervously between them. Elias walked toward the radio and switched it off completely. "You came a long way for nothing," he said. "It's probably atmospheric interference." Victoria gave a faint, humorless laugh. "You don't believe that?" Elias didn't answer. Victoria stepped deeper into the shop, observing the shelves of old equipment surrounding her. "You know, when I pictured the man behind this recording," she said quietly, "I expected somebody very different." "Meaning? Some conspiracy guy living in a bunker?" Lily tried not to smile, but Elias remained expressionless. Victoria continued, "Instead, I find a repair shop that looks frozen in 1989. We close at 6, Elias replied. Victoria sighed softly, already recognizing the type of man she was dealing with. Quiet, defensive, impossible to read. "Look," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "Samuel Reed's disappearance became one of the most famous unsolved aviation mysteries in the country. If that signal is real, it changes nothing," Elias interrupted. Victoria frowned. "How can you say that?" Elias looked at the radio silently for several seconds before answering. "Because dead men don't send transmissions after 23 years. The room fell quiet again. Then Lily suddenly spoke. "But what if he's not dead?" Both adults turned toward her instantly. Victoria stared at the little girl for a moment before slowly kneeling beside her. "What's your name?" "Lily." Victoria smiled faintly. "You believe the signal's real?" Lily shrugged. "My dad only gets that look on his face when something matters." Elias looked away immediately. Victoria stood again. "I'm staying in town for a few days," she said. "If the signal comes back, call me." She placed her number on the counter. Then she headed toward the door before pausing briefly. "One more thing." Elias looked up. Victoria's voice softened for the first time. "My father used to investigate the Reed case before he died." For the first time since she arrived, Elias's expression changed slightly. Not suspicion, recognition. But before he could ask anything, Victoria stepped outside into the cold mountain fog and disappeared down the street. The bell above the door rattled softly behind her. Lily looked up at her father. "You think she's telling the truth?" Elias stared at the phone number, resting beside the old radio. Then, slowly, the transmitter crackled again. Both of them froze instantly. A faint burst of static filled the shop. Then came a broken voice buried deep beneath the interference. "Dot coordinates, North Ridge." Elias lunged toward the radio, while Lily's eyes widened in fear. The signal distorted violently, and then, for the briefest second, a loud metallic scream echoed through the speaker. Like an airplane tearing apart in midair. The sound of twisting metal echoed through the repair shop long after the transmission disappeared. Then, silence. Heavy, unnatural silence. Lily instinctively covered her ears, while Elias stood frozen beside the radio, his heartbeat pounding louder than the storm outside. The final sound from the signal hadn't resembled interference. It sounded real, terrifyingly real, like the final seconds inside a crashing aircraft. Elias immediately grabbed a pencil and wrote down the fragmented coordinates before they faded from memory. Northridge, the old mountain range beyond Blackwood Creek. Lily looked pale. "Dad, what was that?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He kept staring at the transmitter, like he expected the voice to return at any second. Finally, he spoke quietly. "That plane went down somewhere in the mountains." The realization settled heavily over the room. 23 years earlier, hundreds of people had searched those mountains. Rescue teams, military helicopters, investigators. Nothing was ever found. And now somehow, a forgotten radio hidden inside a tiny repair shop was whispering pieces of the truth back to life. The next morning, thick fog rolled across Blackwood Creek as Elias drove his old pickup truck toward the edge of town. Victoria sat in the passenger seat holding a folder filled with newspaper archives and military records spread across her lap. Neither of them had spoken much during the drive. Lily sat quietly in the back seat, wrapped in her oversized sweater, sketching strange symbols she had copied from the side of the military radio. Victoria finally broke the silence. "You really think the coordinates are real?" Elias kept his eyes on the road. "I think somebody wanted them heard." "That doesn't answer my question." Elias sighed softly. "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." Victoria studied him for a moment. You worked with aviation signals before opening the shop, didn't you? Elias nodded once. How long? Almost 12 years. Victoria leaned back slowly. So, you understand why this makes no sense? Yes. Then, why are you still chasing it? For the first time, Elias hesitated before answering. Because the signal sounds like somebody trying very hard not to be forgotten. Victoria looked out the window after that. She didn't realize why those words unsettled her so much. Maybe because deep down, she understood that feeling better than she wanted to admit. Their destination sat near the outskirts of town beside an abandoned gas station, nearly swallowed by time. A faded wooden sign read, Henry's Surplus and Repair. Inside, old military equipment covered every wall. Rusted helmets, radios, maps, broken aircraft parts hanging from dusty shelves. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter. Henry Dawson, former Air Force mechanic, one of the last surviving men connected to the original Samuel Reed investigation. Henry narrowed his eyes immediately when he saw the old transmitter Elias carried into the store. Well, the old man muttered slowly, I never thought I'd see one of those again. Elias carefully placed the radio on the counter. You recognize it? Henry's expression darkened. That transmitter belonged to Reed's aircraft. Victoria stepped forward instantly. You're sure? Henry pointed toward a faded symbol scratched beneath the frequency dial. A custom modification. Reed installed it himself. Lily quietly opened her notebook and showed Henry the strange symbol she had drawn earlier. The old mechanic froze. Where did you see this? On the radio, Lily answered softly. Henry looked suddenly nervous. That's impossible. Elias exchanged a glance with Victoria. Tell us what it means. Henry hesitated for several seconds before finally speaking. It wasn't military. What? Henry lowered his voice. That symbol belonged to a private intelligence division during the Cold War. Unofficial operations, hidden flights. Things nobody was supposed to ask questions about. Victoria's stomach tightened. You're saying Reed wasn't on a normal mission? Henry slowly shook his head. No. And when his plane disappeared, he paused heavily. Some people in Washington looked relieved. The room fell silent. Outside, wind rattled the windows softly. Victoria stared at the radio. For the first time since arriving in Blackwood Creek, this no longer felt like a strange human interest story. It felt dangerous. That evening, snow began falling lightly over the town. Inside the repair shop, Elias carefully cleaned dust from the transmitter, while Victoria sorted through old newspaper clippings spread across the table. Lily sat nearby, drawing quietly. Suddenly, Victoria stopped turning pages. What is it? Elias asked. Victoria held up an old photograph. It showed Samuel Reed standing beside several Air Force engineers in front of a military aircraft. Elias froze instantly, because one of the men in the photo looked painfully familiar. Younger, thinner, but unmistakable. Him, Victoria whispered. Do you know who that is? Elias stared silently at the picture, then slowly sat down. That's my father. Victoria looked stunned. You're serious? Elias nodded faintly without taking his eyes off the photograph. My father worked military communications before he disappeared when I was 14. Victoria's voice dropped. Disappeared? Elias swallowed hard. He left one night and never came home. The entire room seemed to shift around them. Lily looked up from her notebook, confused. You never told me Grandpa worked with airplanes. Elias gave a weak smile. There's a lot I never told anybody. Victoria stared back at the old photograph again. Suddenly, everything felt connected in ways none of them understood yet. Samuel Reed, the mysterious signal, the hidden military symbol, and Elias's father. Somewhere beneath decades of silence, all of it was tied together. Then suddenly, the radio turned on by itself. Static exploded through the shop. Everyone jumped. The signal returned stronger than ever before. And through the noise came Samuel Reed's voice again, clearer this time. If you're hearing this, they lied to all of you. Snow covered the mountains by morning. The forests surrounding Blackwood Creek had disappeared beneath layers of white and grey, while freezing wind swept through the narrow roads leading toward North Ridge. The entire town felt quieter than usual, as if even the world itself were listening now. Inside the repair shop, nobody had slept. Samuel Reed's final transmission continued replaying through Elias's mind over and over again. They lied to all of you. Those words changed everything. Because if Reed was telling the truth, then his disappearance had never been an accident. It had been buried, hidden, erased. Victoria stood near the workbench staring at a map spread across the table while Elias marked the coordinates from the signal beside old aviation charts. Henry Dawson sat nearby in silence, unusually pale beneath the yellow shop lights. Lily carried 3 cups of coffee to the table carefully. "You're really going up there?" she asked softly. Elias looked at the mountains through the frosted window. "We may not get another signal." Victoria folded her arms. "And if there really is a crash site?" Henry finished the sentence quietly. "Then somebody made sure nobody found it." The room fell silent again. Outside, wind rattled against the windows like distant whispers. 2 hours later, Elias's old truck slowly climbed the frozen mountain road leading toward North Ridge. Snow crunched beneath the tires, while thick fog drifted between endless pine trees. Visibility grew worse the higher they climbed. Victoria sat in the passenger seat, clutching Samuel Reed's old photograph tightly in her hands. Henry sat in the back beside several emergency lanterns and radio equipment. Nobody spoke much. The deeper they drove into the mountains, the heavier the atmosphere became, almost oppressive, like the mountain itself had been guarding something for decades. Lily remained behind in town with the diner owner across the street, but before Elias left, she had slipped something into his coat pocket, a folded drawing. He hadn't opened it yet. By noon, the truck could go no farther. The road disappeared beneath deep snow and fallen trees, forcing the group to continue on foot. Wind screamed through the mountains as they climbed higher between icy cliffs and dense forests. Victoria struggled to keep pace. "This is insane," she muttered through freezing breaths. "Aviation teams searched this entire region." Henry looked ahead grimly. "They searched where they were told to search." Elias stopped suddenly. Everyone froze. A faint sound echoed somewhere through the wind. Static. Victoria's eyes widened. Elias slowly removed the portable radio from his backpack. The signal had returned. Weak. Broken. But stronger than before. North Ridge. Below the pass. The signal crackled violently, then disappeared again. Henry pointed toward a narrow opening between 2 cliffs ahead. There. The climb through the pass nearly killed them. Snowstorms reduced visibility to only a few feet, while freezing wind tore through their jackets mercilessly. More than once, Victoria nearly slipped into the ravine below, but Elias kept moving. Calm, focused, silent, like something inside him already knew where to go. Then, finally, they reached the other side of the ridge, and everything stopped. Half buried beneath snow and ice, hidden deep inside the mountains for over 20 years, was the wreckage of a military aircraft. Victoria covered her mouth in shock. Henry stood completely motionless. Even the wind suddenly felt quieter. The plane's broken fuselage rested against the mountainside like the skeleton of something ancient and forgotten. Rust covered most of the metal, while shattered wings disappeared beneath decades of snow. Elias stepped forward slowly. His boots crunched softly against ice as he approached the cockpit. On the side of the aircraft, barely visible beneath layers of frost, faded military numbers remained untouched by time. Henry's voice trembled slightly. "That's Reed's plane." Victoria stared at the wreckage with tears already forming in her eyes. After 23 years, they had finally found him. The aircraft door groaned loudly as Elias forced it open. Inside, the cabin remained frozen in time. Broken instruments, torn wires, emergency lights long dead. Snow drifted through cracks in the fuselage, while old documents scattered across the floor. Victoria carefully picked up a military flight log, Her hands began shaking. These records were sealed. Henry moved toward the cockpit slowly, then suddenly stopped. Oh my God. Elias looked up and froze. Inside the cockpit sat the remains of Captain Samuel Reed, still strapped into his seat, still wearing fragments of his old flight jacket. The room fell into complete silence. Victoria couldn't breathe. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It no longer felt like an investigation. It felt like standing inside a grave. Then Elias noticed something strange. Beside Reed's seat sat a small tape recorder connected directly into the aircraft's communication system. Still intact, Elias carefully removed the frozen cassette from the machine. Written across the label in faded ink were 3 words. "For my daughter." Victoria stared at it silently. "What if," she whispered slowly, "the transmissions weren't accidental?" Elias looked toward Samuel Reed's remains, and for the first time, he realized the horrifying truth. Samuel Reed had never been trying to save himself. He had been trying to leave behind the truth before somebody buried it forever. After returning from the mountains, Elias, Victoria, and Henry gathered inside the small repair shop while snow continued falling outside. Sitting quietly on the workbench was the old cassette labeled "For My Daughter." The room felt heavy with silence as Elias finally placed the tape into the recorder and pressed play. Captain Samuel Reed's weak voice slowly filled the shop. He explained that his flight had never crashed by accident. Reed had discovered evidence connected to secret military operations that powerful people wanted buried forever. Knowing the truth could cost innocent lives, he chose to protect the evidence, even if it meant sacrificing himself in the mountains. But then, the recording changed. Reed began speaking directly to his daughter, Emily. Victoria suddenly froze. Emily was her mother's name. In that moment, she realized the missing pilot she had spent weeks investigating was actually her grandfather. Tears filled her eyes as Reed's final message echoed through the room. "If my daughter ever hears this, I need her to know I never abandoned her." After more than 20 years, the truth finally gave Victoria's family the closure they had never received. In the weeks that followed, Victoria published the biggest story of her career. The hidden investigation surrounding Samuel Reed became national news, and the government officially cleared his name. Reporters flooded Blackwood Creek searching for interviews, but Elias refused every camera and every spotlight. To him, it was never about fame, only about helping the truth find its way home. As winter slowly faded into spring, life in the small mountain town returned to normal. Victoria found herself staying longer and longer in Blackwood Creek, drawn to the quiet warmth of the repair shop and the peaceful life Elias shared with Lily. One late evening, after everyone had gone upstairs, Elias sat alone, repairing the old military transmitter beneath the soft yellow glow of the hanging lamp. Outside, snow melted quietly beneath the Colorado night sky. Then suddenly, the radio crackled one final time. A faint voice emerged through the static. Soft, distant, peaceful. "Thank you." Elias closed his eyes and smiled quietly as the signal disappeared forever. "If this story stayed with you until the very end, then first of all, thank you. Truly." In a world filled with noise, distractions, and endless rushing, the fact that you chose to spend your time here, listening to this quiet story, means more than you probably realize. Stories like these are not just about mystery, old radios, forgotten pilots, or lonely mountain towns. Deep down, they are about people, about love that survives through silence, about fathers who carry pain without ever asking for sympathy, about memories that refuse to disappear, no matter how many years pass. This channel was created for those kinds of stories. Not stories about perfect heroes, not stories about people who always win, but stories about ordinary human beings trying to hold on to kindness in a world that often rewards coldness. Stories about quiet strength, about sacrifice, about second chances, about the invisible emotional battles people fight every single day while the rest of the world keeps moving past them. Maybe that is why so many of us connect to characters like Elias Carter, because somewhere in our lives we have all known someone like him. A father who worked quietly without recognition, a mother who sacrificed everything without complaint, a grandfather who carried memories he never spoke about, a person who fixed broken things while slowly breaking inside themselves. And maybe, for some of us, we are that person. These stories are reminders that even the quietest lives can leave the deepest impact, that dignity matters, that compassion matters, that even when the world forgets someone, love still remembers them somewhere. Sometimes through an old photograph, sometimes through a voice hidden in static, sometimes through the people left behind who refuse to stop searching for the truth. Every single story on this channel is carefully created to bring back something modern life slowly steals from people. Stillness, humanity, emotional connection, the feeling of sitting quietly late at night, listening to a story that makes you feel understood without needing to explain yourself. Here, you'll find stories about lonely fathers, forgotten veterans, small-town heroes, broken families trying to heal, people who were underestimated, and ordinary souls carrying extraordinary hearts. Some stories will make you emotional, some will leave you thinking long after the video ends, and some may simply remind you of someone you miss. But all of them are created with one goal: to make people feel something real again. So if these are the kinds of stories that speak to your heart, we warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel and become part of this community. By subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment, you are helping these quiet human stories continue to exist in a world that desperately needs more empathy and less noise. And honestly, your comments mean everything to this channel. Many people watching these videos are working late at night, eating dinner alone, driving long roads, recovering from loss, or simply trying to find comfort after difficult days. Sometimes a single comment from a stranger can make someone feel less alone. So before you leave, we would truly love to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Did it remind you of someone in your own life? Do you believe some people are never truly forgotten? We read far more comments than you might think. And if you would like to continue this journey with us, there are many more emotional cinematic stories waiting for you here on the channel. Stories filled with mystery, healing, family, redemption, hope, sacrifice, and the quiet beauty hidden inside ordinary lives. Until next time, take care of yourself. Call the people you love while you still can. And never underestimate the power of kindness, because sometimes the quietest hearts leave the loudest echoes behind. Thank you for listening, and thank you for keeping these untold stories alive.
Thank you for watching my video.